mynews.studio.
In the Guatemalan highlands, where hills once stood bare for miles, something different is happening. Can a small group of villagers really bring a dead landscape back to life?
That's the real question here. Let's set the scene. It's August 26th, 2025. If you walk through Pachaj, Guatemala, in the late 1990s, there wasn't much green at all. Years of logging and mining. Then the long civil war. It left the land stripped. Water sources dried up. The soil just washed away.
For Mayan families there, the land was more than just a place to live. It was how they sustained themselves. By the late 90s, things had reached a crisis point. But this isn't only a story of decline. It's about what happens when people refuse to give up. In 1999, Armando López Pocal decided enough was enough. He was frustrated with failed government efforts, so he tried something new.
But he didn't start alone, right? He gathered friends, and together they launched the Chico Mendes Reforestation Project. The name comes from Chico Mendes, the Brazilian environmentalist who stood up to big interests and paid for it with his life. Armando and his friends wanted to honor that spirit in their own community.
Their focus was on native trees: pine, cypress, alder, oak. But here's where it gets interesting. They leaned on traditional Mayan ecological knowledge, things like planting by the phases of the moon, or mixing tree species with food crops, so everything matched the rhythms of the land. The whole community joined in, especially the children.
That's what really stands out to me. It wasn't just about planting trees, it was about passing on knowledge, rebuilding a sense of place. And it worked. Over more than 2 decades, they planted over 20,000 trees every year. But that's not just a number. That's water returning to streams, soil staying in place, birds and insects coming back.
Let's talk about how they funded all this for a moment. They didn't depend on government grants that came with conditions. Instead, international volunteers paid to stay with local families. That money stayed right in the community. And it was more than just financial support. It was a real cultural exchange. People left Pachaj and became advocates for the project, spreading the story far beyond Guatemala.
It wasn't all smooth, though. There were wildfires, some set on purpose, droughts, land grabs, mining companies pushing in. The government offered some help, but only if locals stopped opposing mining. Why would they agree to that?
They didn't. They chose to keep their independence. That's a key lesson here. Grassroots projects survive when they stick to their core values and build partnerships that don't force them to compromise.
So what's changed? Today, the hills around Pachaj are green again. Kids planting saplings, elders teaching them, everyone involved. Water sources have returned. The soil is healthy. And now, this project is a model for others across Latin America.
And this story goes beyond Guatemala. Deforestation and climate change are happening everywhere, but this case shows that local leadership and traditional knowledge really make a difference. Why don't more restoration projects use this model?
That's a fair point. Too often, outside solutions ignore what locals already know. Here, indigenous leadership is front and center. The results aren't just visible, trees, water, jobs, but they're also more subtle, things like hope, agency, resilience.
So maybe the bigger lesson isn't only about trees or even Guatemala. It's about what can happen when people shape their own future, using knowledge that's always been part of their community.
And maybe that's a template for other places too. Practical, community-led, grounded in tradition, but always open to new partners and new ideas.
Which brings us back to where we started. Those once barren hills are green again. Not because of a top-down program, but because a community decided not to let go.
Thanks for joining us to explore this story. If you want to see real grassroots climate work in action, look to places like Pachaj.
Thank you for listening. This episode was brought to you by mynews.studio. Try it now for free.